Hello and welcome to this session in which we would look at the role of international accounting standard in relation to the US auditing standards. So we're going to look at the international standards, but we're going to look at them from how do they compare to the US standards. Well, the first thing we need to know is to kind of review what are the US auditing standards. And if you remember, we had two separate sessions, one about the private company Accounting Oversight Board, PCAOB, and we said that this board sets the standards, the accounting standards for public companies. Public companies, also we call them issuers, if you remember, right? Publicly traded companies or issuer. Then, I believe in the prior session, we looked at the AICPA, and we said the AICPA sets the standard for the private companies, which is non-issuers, private companies. They're not publicly traded. And if you remember, the board called what? The board is called the Accounting Standard Board, ASB, and ASB issue SASs, statements on auditing standards. And basically the SASs, we call them generally accepted accounting principle. Now, just real quick, before Sarbanes-Oxley, if you remember when we talked about Sarbanes-Oxley, before Sarbanes-Oxley, the AICPA used to audit both private and public companies. So you could imagine that there's a lot of similarity between the AICPA standard and the PCAOB. Matter of fact, when the PCAOB came to life, what did they do first? They first used the AICPA standard. So they were using the SASs as an interim until they updated them for publicly traded companies. So this is the US. Now, who sets the standard? Now basically we said, well, then we have one group or two boards. And what about the third one? Now we're going to be talking about the third one, and that's where the international auditing standard comes into play. So now we're going to be talking about the third one, which is international. So the international standards on auditing, ISA, are issued by, there's a lot of terms thrown in this session, the International Auditing Assurance Standard Board, IAASB, of the International Federation Accountant. So this is basically, think of the International Federation Accounting, think of it as the international AICPA. So this is the board. Basically, think of it as the international AICPA. What is that? It's the organization. It's the organization for CPAs, for auditors globally. So in the US we have the AICPA. Internationally we have the International Federation of Accountants. So it's a worldwide organization for the accountancy profession. Just like the AICPA, it's for US accountancy professions. Okay, so what's the role of the IAASB? Works to improve the uniformity of auditing practices throughout the world. So throughout the world, what they'll try to do, they'll try to set one standard. And since the US is part of the world, we'll try to also harmonize this process. And frankly, to tell you, it's much easier to harmonize auditing standard versus accounting standard. And I'm sure if you take an international accounting, you will learn about the cultural differences. But when it comes to auditing, there's a lot of commonality between US standard as well as international standard. But bear in mind that the international standard on audit, the ISA, do not override any country's regulation in terms of audit practices. They don't override them. Okay, so most countries, including the US, base their auditing standard on the ISA. So now what's happening is they are basing, when we have a new standard, they're basing it on the international standard. And obviously they're modified as appropriate for each country's regulatory environment. For example, in the US, remember we talked about Sarbanes-Oxley, SOX. So it has certain legal and regulatory challenges that are unique to the United States. So obviously they're going to rely on the international standard of audit, but each country might have its own unique needs, just like in the US we have Sarbanes-Oxley. Okay, so the Auditing Standard Board, the ASB in the United States, the ASB is part of the AICPA. I know there's a lot of terms being thrown at you, but it is what it is, has revised its auditing standard to converge with the international standard. So the AICPA is already trying to converge with international standard, as well as the PCAOB, as you saw, also it's also trying to converge with the international standard. So there's a lot of conversion that's going on. Okay. So auditing standards for private companies and other entities in the US are established by the Auditing Standard Board of, which is ASB, of the AICPA. Obviously, this is this statement deals with private companies, and we already talked about this. And remember, the private companies are conversion with international standard. These standards are called Statement of Auditing Standard, SAS, which we already talked about this. This is the third time. The AICPA standard are also referred to as GAS. So those standards are also referred to as Generally Accepted Accounting Principle, Generally Accepted Auditing Statements, GAS. Prior to the passage of Sarbanes-Oxley, as I told you, the ASB established the auditing standard for both, as I said, private and public. Now the PCAOB has the responsibility for setting the auditing standard for public companies and broker-dealers registered with the US. So obviously there's a lot of similarities between the there's a lot of similarity between the AICPA and PCAOB, which is private and public, and both of them, they have similarities with international standard on auditing. So basically there's a lot of, not conversion, but a lot of similarities. Okay. So initially the PCAOB adopted the existing auditing standard established by the AICPA, which is AICPA, the ASB, as an interim standard. The PCAOB consider international standard when developing new standards. So notice they are looking at international standard when they're developing a new standard. This way they are all similar across the globe. The PCAOB, again, when we see the PCAOB, start with the P, we're dealing with publicly traded companies. Issuers apply only to the audit of US public companies and broker-dealers. Okay. And figure 2-1 shows the relationship among the three. So this figure here, international standard on auditing applicable to entities outside the US, AICPA applicable to private, and PCAOB applicable to US public companies and other SEC registered under the broker-dealer. This might change the broker-dealer because now with President Trump, they might be changing this rule. So the broker-dealers might be out of this section, but again, I cannot predict what Congress or what President Trump is going to do, but it may be the case. So this is basically, hopefully what we did is we looked at the international auditing standard and how are they similar to the US. Very, very similar in contrast to the accounting standard. There's still more work to do. They're more similar than ever now, but there's still more work to do in terms of conversion. Excellent. A lot of terms in this session. Make sure you work. You learn the terms. Once again, I'm going to go through it one more time. AICPA, private. Those are, we call them SAS, and those are known also as GAS. PCAOB, public traded companies, and international, obviously international. Study hard, read your textbook, complete your work. Good luck.